I closed the door behind me, my back pressed against the cold, rough wood as if seeking comfort in its chill. My breathing came in shallow gasps, and my heart pounded so fiercely it felt as though the beat might echo throughout the entire house. In the dim light of the hallway, I could see him, Tyler, standing just a few paces away. His figure emerged from the shadows, his eyes, which I desperately tried to ignore for so long, now piercing through the darkness and directly into mine. This wasn't meant to happen. I told myself over and over. It was wrong, irrational, even crazy. And yet, as Tyler took a measured step toward me, I found that I couldn't step back. I was frozen, torn between reason and an undeniable, dangerous attraction. Just yesterday, my friends have been laughing with me, convincing me that at my age, a woman could no longer be troubled by fleeting emotions or secret desires. They had no inkling that in the quiet hours of the night, while William, my husband, slept in the adjoining room, I would clutch my pillow in the dark, trying desperately to silence the intrusive thoughts that threatened to overwhelm me. I had built walls around my heart, determined to forget the stirring of a passion that I long ago deemed inappropriate. And yet, there he was, Tyler, whose presence now seemed to unlock something deep and forbidden inside of me. I should have stopped him. I should have pushed him away, reclaimed the safe, predictable life I dealt with William. But as I stood there, the gravity of Tyler's gaze pulled me in. His eyes were filled with an intensity one hadn't seen in years, a dangerous blend of longing and defiance. The very air around us seemed to crackle with the electric charge of the onset. I knew that if I allowed this moment to continue, there'd be no turning back. A million thoughts raced through my mind. What if William suspected something was amiss? What if this encounter marked the beginning of a descent into chaos? I had promised myself that nothing would jeopardize the stability of my life, yet my body betrayed me with every shudder of anticipation. The truth was, I was tired of the hollow comfort of routine. I craved something raw and unpredictable, even as it came with peril. As Tyler drew closer, the memory of every secret midnight conversation, every silent glance in the mirror, and every heartbeat that had echoed with a forbidden desire over the past few months swirled within me. I recalled the times when I longed for an escape from the suffocating predictability of my existence. My friends had said that a woman of my age should be content with the life she'd built, but they never spoke of the aching loneliness that sometimes accompanied long, quiet nights. Tyler's presence now brought that loneliness into painful clarity. His voice was soft but edged with an unmistakable promise of something more, a promise that tonight, I might finally experience the intensity one had been suppressing for so long. And even as I knew the risks, I couldn't help but be drawn to him like a moth to a flame. I steadied my trembling hands against the doorframe, feeling both the physical chill of the wood and the emotional chill of my own uncertainty. Every instinct screamed for caution, yet my heart was already surrendering to the magnetism between us. With every passing second, the silence in the room became more oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see William emerging from the shadows, his eyes filled with suspicion. But there was only darkness and the soft hum of the night outside. For a fleeting moment, I considered retreating into the safety of solitude, closing the door to Tyler in a tumult of my own desires. Yet, as his eyes locked onto mine, I realized that tonight nothing would be the same. I was standing at the edge of a precipice, and there was no turning back once I took that final step. Every nerve in my body ignited with an uncertain thrill. I remembered the whispered conversations in the quiet hours, the secret smiles exchanged in the hallways of my mind, and the long nights spent wondering if there was more to life than the monotonous rhythm of my marriage. Tyler represented that more, the unknown, the dangerous, the exhilarating. And as he closed the distance between us, I felt the slow, inevitable collapse of the walls I had so carefully built. I tried to steady my thoughts, to remind myself of the rational voice that told me this was madness. But in that moment, with Tyler's presence enveloping me in a heady mix of danger and desire, I knew that rationality had long since been overpowered by the rush of raw emotion. I could no longer deny the magnetic pull of his gaze, the allure of his soft, unspoken promises. The night stretched out before us, a dark canvas upon which all our hidden desires could finally be painted in vivid, unforgiving strokes. I felt a surge of defiance, a sudden and overwhelming need to embrace the passion I'd kept locked away for too long. Tonight, the rules no longer mattered. Tonight, I was ready to step into a world where every whispered word, every shared glance, carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken secrets. And so, as Tyler moved closer, our eyes locked in a silent exchange of mutual understanding and undeniable need, I made a choice. A choice that would shatter the confines of my familiar life and thrust me into a realm where passion, danger, and heartache danced in an intricate, inevitable embrace. I took a slow, shuddering breath, feeling the cold air mingle the heat of my anticipation. There was no turning back. In that charged moment, with the world reduced to the space between us, I surrendered to the unknown, to the dangerous allure of a night that promised to rewrite the very fabric of my existence. It all began on the day William announced he'd be away on a business trip, a trip that was suddenly extended, leaving our home empty of his reassuring presence. I hadn't realized how much I relied on the comfort of his routines until that day arrived. And then, without warning, Tyler returned to my life, not as the timid friend I once knew, but as a man transformed, a man whose very presence seemed to ignite something forbidden within me. At first, it was the smallest of encounters. A fleeting smile across the kitchen table as I prepared a late lunch, or a brief moment of shared laughter while we both reached for the coffee pot. Each accidental meeting carried a weight far greater than its simplicity suggested. I began noticing him everywhere, in the way he casually brushed his hair back as he walked through the living room, in the subtle, knowing glances that passed between us like silent confessions. One cool morning, I decided to step outside for some fresh air, meaning to clear the restless thoughts that had begun to crowd my mind. The backyard was bathed in the soft glow of sunrise, and there, in the center of the yard, Tyler was engaged in his morning workout. The sun's rays played over his toned muscles, lending his skin a golden hue that made him appear almost ethereal. I couldn't tear my eyes away. He caught sight of me almost immediately. "Good morning," he said in a tone so calm and natural that it sent shivers down my spine. His words were simple, yet layered with a promise that made my heart flutter. I attempted to return the greeting with the same nonchalance, but my voice faltered, betraying the storm of emotions raging within me. There was a moment, brief, yet eternal, when our eyes locked. I felt as though he could see straight into the depths of my soul, reading every secret desire and every hidden regret. I remembered the nights spent awake in the darkness, my thoughts too loud to ignore, each heartbeat a reminder that I was yearning for something more than the confines of my current life. Tyler's presence had always been magnetic, but now it was overwhelming. Every casual touch, every lingering look, seemed calculated to erode the fragile barriers I built around myself. And as he moved closer, his hand brushing lightly against mine as if by accident, I knew that our connection was far from coincidental. It was as if fate itself had conspired to bring us together in a moment that defied reason. As the days passed, these encounters grew bolder. The subtle flirtations turned into deliberate advances, each one weaving a web of anticipation and dread within me. In the quiet of the afternoons, while I busied myself with the mundane tasks of daily life, I found my mind drifting back to Tyler's captivating smile and the dangerous glint in his eyes. There was a thrill in his presence, a reckless, heady sensation that promised both pleasure and peril. Yet, amidst this intoxicating whirlwind, I couldn't shake the persistent fear that I was venturing too far into forbidden territory. Every time our hands brushed, every time his eyes held mine a moment too long, I felt as though I was teetering on the edge of a precipice. I was caught in a silent battle between the desire to embrace this newfound passion and the need to maintain the safe, predictable life I dealt with. I would catch myself staring at Tyler long after our brief interactions had ended, the memory of his touch lingering on my skin like a ghost. In those moments, I was reminded of the countless nights I'd spent wrestling with my own thoughts, a silent rebellion against the monotony of a life devoid of genuine excitement. Now, with every stolen glance and every secret meeting, I was beginning to wonder if I could ever go back to the way things were. My friends, who had once dismissed my inner turmoil as mere youthful fancy, now whispered among themselves, unaware of the storm that raged behind my calm facade. They thought I was simply enjoying a bit of harmless flirtation, never realizing that each interaction with Tyler was chipping away at the carefully constructed walls of my existence. The realization that I was willingly stepping into a realm of uncertainty both terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. One evening, as twilight fell over the quiet streets of our suburban neighborhood, I found myself alone in the backyard. The gentle rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the world beyond my gate provided a backdrop to my swirling thoughts. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine a life where I could surrender fully to the dangerous allure of this forbidden romance without the constant guilt and fear of discovery. It was a fantasy, a desperate escape from a reality that had grown too confining, too predictable. But even in my fantasies, I knew that the stakes were impossibly high. Tyler's eyes, with their promise of passion and pain, haunted my every thought. And as the moon rose high in the sky, casting its silvery glow over the world, I understood with a painful clarity that every secret smile and every hushed word was a step further down a path with no return. That night, as I lay in bed, William's absence echoed in the silence. I could still hear the distant sound of Tyler's laughter, the gentle murmur of his voice in my mind. I felt as though I was standing at the crossroads of a decision that would forever alter the course of my life, one path leading back to a safe, predictable existence, and the other into the unknown realm of desire and betrayal. And in that dark, lonely moment, I realized that I had already begun to walk the line between right and wrong, knowing that with each step, I was sealing my fate. Days turned into a blur of conflicting emotions and secret meetings. The tension between us grew palpable, an invisible thread connecting Tyler and me that no one else could see. I tried to maintain the facade of a calm, composed woman in the eyes of the world, but inside, every fiber of my being was aflame with a reckless desire I could no longer ignore. I remember one particular evening when I had stayed late in the living room, engrossed in a book, as the rest of the house sank into a heavy silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the lamp that cast dancing shadows on the walls. It was then that I first heard his voice, a quiet murmur, almost as if it were a part of the night itself. "Are you reading something interesting?" he asked softly, standing at the doorway. Tyler leaned casually against the doorframe, his arms folded as he watched me with an intensity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I froze for a moment, the words on the page dissolving into a blur as his presence overtook the room. I cleared my throat and attempted to smile, pretending that nothing was amiss. But the truth was, every word he spoke felt loaded with meaning, every gesture a silent promise of what might come if I allowed myself to slip further from the safety of my old life. As he stepped further into the room, the distance between us shrank until I could feel the warmth of his breath mingling with the cool night air. Without fully understanding how or when it happened, our conversation shifted from casual banter to a subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of the desires that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. Tyler's hand brushed against mine, a touch so light and fleeting it could have been a trick of the imagination, yet it ignited a spark that spread like wildfire through my veins. I found myself caught in a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was the guilt, the nagging voice in the back of my mind reminding me that I was betraying the safe, albeit predictable, life I'd known for years. On the other hand, there was the overwhelming need to break free from the shackles of convention, to experience the raw, unfiltered passion that Tyler promised with every stolen glance and every whispered word. That night, as I lay awake in the darkness long after Tyler had departed, I replayed every moment in my mind. I could still feel the ghost of his touch on my skin, a memory so vivid it seemed to burn. It was a painful, beautiful contradiction, a reminder of everything I had once suppressed, and of the dangerous allure that now beckoned me toward a future I both craved and feared. Over the following days, our encounters grew bolder. In the quiet corners of our shared spaces, we found moments of intimacy that were as fleeting as they were intense. Tyler's eyes held secrets that I was desperate to uncover, and every time our hands brushed or our gazes locked, I felt the boundaries between right and wrong blur into insignificance. It was as if we were living in a world where nothing else mattered except the forbidden pulse of our shared desire. I began to question everything I had once believed about love and loyalty. The life I'd built with William was one of comfort and routine, but it was also one of quiet desperation, a slow, creeping loneliness that had gnawed at me for years. Tyler, with all his imperfections and dangerous allure, represented a raw, unpredictable passion that threatened to upend everything I had known. And as much as I feared the consequences, I found myself increasingly drawn to that perilous edge. My days became a series of calculated risks and stolen moments. I'd catch myself daydreaming in the middle of conversations, my thoughts drifting to the next time I might see Tyler's captivating smile or feel the gentle press of his hand against mine. Every encounter, no matter how brief, was a reminder that life was full of possibilities that defied the mundane, embraced the chaos of desire. But even as I allowed myself to be swept away by this dangerous romance, a shadow of doubt lingered. I wondered if this path would lead to inevitable heartbreak or if it was simply a fleeting escape from a life that had grown too stifling to bear. The risks were enormous. Not only was I betraying William, a man who had once been my entire world, but I was also venturing into an emotional territory where nothing was certain and every step carried the threat of ruin. Yet, in the quiet moments of introspection, I found a strange sense of liberation in the uncertainty. I began to understand that sometimes, the only way to truly feel alive was to risk everything, to embrace the unknown with an open heart and a defiant spirit. Tyler was a catalyst for that transformation, a reminder that life's most profound experiences often come from moments of recklessness and vulnerability. As the nights grew longer and the whispers of our secret rendezvous grew louder in my mind, I realized that I was standing at the crossroads of a decision that would forever alter the course of my life. The safe, familiar world was slipping away, replaced by a tempest of desire and risk. And with every stolen glance, every forbidden touch, I felt the call of that unknown horizon, beckoning me to step off the edge and into a future where passion reigned supreme. That evening, after one particularly intense encounter, I found myself alone in the living room, the weight of my choices pressing down on me like an invisible force. I stared at the dark corners of the room, trying to reconcile the conflicting voices in my mind, the voice of caution and the voice of unbridled longing. I knew that the time had come to face the consequences of my actions, to accept that there was no turning back from the path I had chosen. And so, as I sat there in the quiet solitude, with the memory of Tyler's touch still lingering on my skin, I made a silent vow to myself. I would no longer hide from the truth of my desires, no matter how dangerous or unpredictable they might. The lines between right and wrong had blurred, and in that hazy twilight of passion and fear, I finally understood that sometimes the only way to truly live was to surrender to the chaos of the heart. For an entire day, I tried to bury the tumultuous thoughts swirling in my mind. I went about my routines, cooking dinner, tidying up the house, even smiling at neighbors on my afternoon walk, as if nothing were amiss. But beneath the calm exterior, Every moment was charged with the memory of Tyler and the forbidden promise that hovered between us. The mundane rituals of daily life had become a silent battleground where reason waged war against a growing, irresistible passion. When I returned home one evening after an outing with friends, I sensed something different in the air. The house was dimly lit, with shadows playing quietly on the walls, and a faint tension had settled over everything. I paused in the doorway, trying to decipher the strange silence that seemed to welcome me instead of the usual warmth of familiarity. It was then that my phone rang, a call from William. His voice was distant, tinged with the monotony of a man accustomed to routine, yet that small call carried the weight of an unspoken truth. He was still out there, unaware of the shifting dynamics within our hull. Before I could fully process my emotions, I heard another sound, a soft, measured knock at the door. My heart stuttered. I moved toward the entrance, every step heavy with apprehension. When I opened the door, there he stood, Tyler, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the porch light. His eyes were calm, but there was a seriousness in his expression that told me this was no casual visit. "William just called," Tyler said quietly, his voice steady. "He said he's delayed another week." His tone wasn't one of triumph or regret. It was matter of fact, as if the information itself held a gravity that neither of us could ignore. For a few heartbeats, the space between us felt insubstantial. I could sense the weight of his words as they sank into the silence of the night. I stepped aside to let him in, though every instinct screamed at me to close the door and hide from the inevitable consequences of this encounter. As Tyler entered, the room seemed to constrict around us, the very air charged with anticipation. He moved closer, and in a hushed tone that barely disturbed the quiet, he said, "Maybe you can pretend nothing's happening." His suggestion was not an order, but a quiet acknowledgement of the dangerous tightrope we were walking. I knew that deep down, I should retreat, should let reason win. But I also knew that in this moment, reason was a luxury I could no longer afford. I felt the warmth of his presence as he came nearer, the subtle brush of his hand against mine igniting a flurry of conflicting emotions. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself that I was caught in a web of my own making. But every word he spoke, every soft smile he offered, made it harder to cling to the safety of my old life. As the minutes passed, the tension in the room grew more palpable. We exchanged a series of words and glances that conveyed more than any overt confession ever could. I was painfully aware that with each second, the risk was mounting, risking not just the collapse of my carefully maintained world, but also the very essence of who I believed I was. In that charged atmosphere, I realized that the boundaries between duty and desire had become irrevocably blurred. The familiar contours of my life were shifting, and I was powerless to stop the tide of emotions that Tyler had awakened within me. Even as his hand rested against my shoulder, as his whispered words filled the space between us, I sensed that I was standing on the brink of an irreversible change. I wanted to believe that I could somehow compartmentalize these moments, that I could return to the safety of my predictable existence once the storm had passed. But deep inside, I knew that the storm was only growing fiercer. The call from William, the unyielding tension of the quiet house, and the relentless pull of Tyler's presence all converged to form a vortex of desire and dread. That night, as I lay in bed with the memory of Tyler's touch still vivid on my skin, I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. I was caught between two worlds: the life I had built with William, filled with routine and stability, and the tumultuous, dangerous passion that Tyler represented. The decision that lay ahead was not merely about choosing between two men, but about choosing who I wanted to be: a woman confined by societal expectations, or one who dared to embrace the uncertainty of a life unbound by convention. The silence of the night pressed in around me as I contemplated the cost of my desires. Every moment with Tyler was a step away from the life I'd known, a journey into a realm where love and betrayal intertwined in a delicate, perilous dance. I realized that tonight, as the shadows lengthened and the promise of the unknown beckoned, I was standing at a crossroads, a moment where every choice carried the weight of irrevocable change. I closed my eyes, trying to steady the tumult of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. In that dark solitude, I recognized that there was no simple solution, no easy escape from the consequences of the path I'd chosen. The lines between right and wrong had faded, replaced by a raw, desperate need to feel something, anything beyond the stifling monotony of my everyday existence. Tonight was destined to be the turning point, a night that would forever redefine the boundaries of my existence. William would not return. My friends, oblivious to the dangerous game unfolding in the shadows, believed that I was alone in the house. And Tyler had promised to come precisely at midnight, a promise that reverberated in my mind like a final, irrevocable verdict. I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, fighting against the overwhelming chorus of my racing heart. I had spent the day preparing myself for this moment, rehearsing countless scenarios in my head, yet nothing could have truly readied me for the raw intensity of the present. As I adjusted my hair and took a deep, steadying breath, I tried to convince myself that I was in control, that this night, however perilous, was mine to command. Then came the sound, a soft, deliberate knock at the door. The moment had arrived. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, the metallic coolness of it grounding me in the midst of the swirling chaos of my thoughts. When I opened the door, Tyler stood before me, a figure of quiet determination and dangerous allure. He stepped in and closed the door behind him, shutting out the uncertain world beyond. "Tonight is for us," he murmured, his voice low and resonant, carrying a promise that sent shivers down my spine. His hands moved with deliberate certainty, trailing along the curve of my back. Each touch was a silent affirmation of a forbidden desire that had been building for so long. I felt my own hands respond instinctively, reaching out to him even as a part of me screamed in protest. In that instant, time seemed to slow, the world around us fading until there was nothing but the intense heat of our intertwined emotions. I was acutely aware of every sensation, the brush of his fingers, the subtle pressure of his gaze, the quiet hum of the night that bore witness to our clandestine meeting. But then, as if summoned by fate itself, a sharp sound shattered the fragile cocoon of our intimacy, a sudden clatter from outside, accompanied by a deep, resounding noise that made my blood run cold. I jerked away from Tyler, my eyes snapping to the window. There, illuminated by the harsh glare of the streetlights, stood William. His silhouette was unmistakable, a figure of stern resolve and raw heart, his eyes fixed unblinkingly on me. For a moment, everything froze. The tension in the room, the heavy weight of my decisions, all coalesced into a single, unbearable instant. William's presence shattered the illusion we had created. The man I had trusted, the life I had so carefully constructed, was now intruding upon the dangerous, passionate realm I had entered. Tyler's hand froze mid-motion. The shock in his eyes was evident, and the closeness we had shared dissolved into a bitter, painful silence. My heart hammered in my chest as I stepped back, the cold reality of the situation crashing over me like a tidal wave. In that split second, I understood that every secret, every stolen moment, had led us inexorably to this moment of reckoning. William's eyes bore into me, filled with a mix of confusion, anger, and betrayal. And as I looked from his piercing gaze to Tyler's regretful, pained expression, I felt the full weight of my choices. The night that had promised liberation and passion had turned into a tableau of heartbreak and consequence. Time seemed to stand still as I took in the scene. The room, once filled with the promise of dangerous intimacy, now saturated with the harsh reality of shattered trust. In that charged silence, I realized that the life I had known was irrevocably broken, and the path ahead would be strewn with the remnants of choices made in the heat of a forbidden night. With William's presence demanding an answer, I felt the gravity of every decision pressing upon me. There was no escape now from the heartbreak that would follow, from the realization that the delicate balance between passion and responsibility had been forever disturbed. I knew that tonight marked not only the climax of an illicit romance but the beginning of a painful reckoning, one that would redefine the course of my life. In the final moments before the inevitable confrontation, I closed my eyes, trying to summon the strength to face the consequences of my actions. The door, the mirror, the stark reality of William's presence, they all merged into a single, inescapable truth. I had chosen a path of passion, betrayal, and heartache, and now I would have to live with every painful consequence. And so, as the echoes of that fateful knock reverberated in the quiet darkness, I knew that there was no turning back. The night had delivered its final, irrevocable blow, a moment of truth that would forever alter the landscape of my heart and the life I once thought I knew.